In the last lesson, we went through how to connect to APIs and we reviewed the YouTube Data API. We also created our API key. If you missed all of that, check out the playlist right over here. Now we're ready to start retrieving data from the API. Let's dive right in. All right, so let's test out getting data from this API. Now, before we get into Xcode to try this out, there's an even easier way that we can test out this API right from within the documentation. They have this thing called an API Explorer, and you can test out the endpoints right from this panel. Now, all you have to do is make sure that you're logged in to your Google account in the upper right corner. And this is the same account that you created your API key with in the lesson 1. Remember how we had to log in to our Google account and come here, create a project, and then create an API key? What's going to happen as long as you're logged into the same Google account is when you use this API Explorer, it's going to grab that API key from there and use that. So let's test out the endpoint. Now we're actually going to use this one, playlist items endpoint, because in the previous lesson, I talked about using the playlist endpoint, but this one actually just gives you information about the playlist itself. So playlist items, this is the one we want to use. So as you can see, this is the URL that we have to send the request to. This is the request type, and this is the only required parameter, and you can specify different levels of detail that you want to retrieve. Now, the reason they do this is because for your purposes, you might not need all the information. And in that case, you can specify perhaps a lower level of detail, and that would save bandwidth, right? Why retrieve more information than you need? It's going to take longer, it's going to take more bandwidth, and so on and so forth. So I've figured out that for this app, I need the thumbnail, the video ID to display the video, obviously, thumbnail to show the image. I need the title and the description, and that's about it. And snippet is the level of detail that I need. It contains all of what I just mentioned. Now, the other parameter that I have to specify is the playlist ID, because I want to retrieve all the videos from a specific playlist. Now, when I first used this endpoint, I made the mistake of putting the playlist ID into this parameter, but it didn't return anything, and I realized that, oh, I'm supposed to put it into this one. So don't make the same mistake. Now let me show you how you can get the ID of the playlist that you want. So I've got a playlist right here that I want to use, and keep in mind you can use any playlist that you want. So everything after this equals sign right here, and before any ampersand, that is the playlist ID. So your URL might have something like this. Let's say nt equals 1, 2, and whatever. So between the equal sign and the and sign, after list equals, that is your playlist ID. Don't worry, if you'll find out really quickly if it is the playlist ID or not, because if you don't get any data back from this API call, then you'll know that that actually wasn't the playlist ID. Okay, so that's my playlist ID. I'm going to copy that. And then in my API Explorer, let me full screen this. And maybe I'll just make the text a little bigger so it's easier to see. Under playlist ID, I'm going to paste that. Okay, and I have to specify a part here. Remember, this could be content details, ID status, or snippet. So snippet is what I need. I'm going to put it there. And you can also see how it changes the URL that you're going to have to send a network request to. If you take a look, this might be interesting for you. This is the endpoint, right, that we're sending to hit the API, send a request to. And then the data that I specified here in the parameters, it's all here. Look, part equals snippet, playlist ID equals that ID, and then key equals your API key. Now there's no text box to put in my API key here. So this is pulling from your key that you created here. That's why you have to make sure that you're logged in to the same account, and because it's going to go grab it from there. Okay, I'm going to uncheck Google OAuth. I'm going to hit execute. If everything goes well, you should get a 200 response, which means that it was successful. And then you get all this data back. Now, this is the JSON formatted data that I was telling you about that comes back from the response from the YouTube API. And it's up to us to turn this data, remember that process is called JSON parsing, right? To turn this JSON data into usable data within our app. You're going to see how to do that in a few lessons in this series for sure. But for now, I just want to take a look very quickly at the data that gets returned and make sure that I have the information that I need. So here I can see that I have the title of the lesson, the description of the lesson, the thumbnails, image URLs. I have the video ID there, perfect. And then this is for lesson 2 and so on and so forth. So I have everything. Now, if you didn't get this response, maybe you got an error or something like that, I would double check that part equals a snippet spelled correctly. I would make sure your playlist ID is correct. Maybe perhaps you grabbed the wrong segment of the URL there. And then I would also make sure that I'm logged into the right Google account that has access to the API key. And then try it again, hit execute. Now, if this doesn't work, for some reason you can't get it working, don't worry. Remember, this was just a quick test. The real test is to be able to do this inside Xcode, right? Inside an iOS app. So that's what we're gonna do next. Don't worry if you didn't get this part. This was a quick test of the API. We are going to now start our Xcode project. We're going to start a test project. Okay, so this is not going to be our real app. What I like to do when I'm trying new things is to just open up a new Xcode project, try something out, make sure I can get it working before I integrate it into my main project. Right, so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to create a test Xcode project and we're going to try this out. All right, so let's do it. I hope you're enjoying the lesson so far. Now, just in case you want to launch your own app, I want to tell you about CWC Plus. This step-by-step program will help you launch your own app even if you don't have any experience. And it takes about 4 months. If this sounds like something you're interested in, I have a special offer for you. I'll leave the link in the description below this video, and hopefully I'll see you there. If not, no worries. I really appreciate that you're here watching this lesson and learning with us. So thank you for that. Anyways, now back to the lesson. All right, so let's create our Xcode project. So I am going to do this and launch a new Xcode project. Okay, under iOS, let's choose app. Let's go next. Okay, I'm going to call it test YT API. This is not our official app. It's just going to be a test. Interface is Swift UI, language is Swift, storage is none. All of this is unchecked. Let's click next. I don't need to create a Git repository. I'm just going to create this on my desktop because it'll be a throwaway project. Okay, let us do this now. Just make it a little bigger so we can see. And then what we're going to do is send that API call right when this launches from here. So I want to add a task here, .task, and open up a pair of curly brackets. And in here, we're going to make the network call and print the results. Remember, I'm not going to do things the best way. I just want to make sure that I can connect to the API from Xcode, receive the right data back, right? We're testing out the API. And this is not necessarily where we would do things as well in our real project. Again, this is a test. I'll explain to you what the task is a little later. I'll connect all the dots for you. But for now, we're going to do it in this little task block. So I want you to type that out. And then let me type out some code statements and walk you through, not code statements, but some comments and walk you through the steps that we're going to take. All right, so first we're going to define the endpoint URL with parameters. All right, so that's the URL that we're going to send the request to. We're going to create a URL instance. We're going to create a URL request instance. That's the thing that we're actually going to send. And then we are going to send the request with URL session. And that's a mechanism for us to do networking with. And then we are going to print out the response. Okay, we're also going to have to handle errors. Okay, so let's try this out now. First, let's define the endpoint URL with parameters. So if you take a look back at the API Explorer here, you'll see that this right here contains everything we need, except we have to insert our API key right there. So this is essentially the URL that we have to hit. It's already written out for us. Okay, so that's what I'm going to take. Now, if one thing I want to point out, which I'm not exactly sure why, if you take a look at this endpoint domain, it says youtube.googleapis.com. But if you take a look at this, it's googleapis.com/YouTube. I've used both. They both work. I mean, this would probably be a little safer to use because this is in the official documentation, whereas this is in this API Explorer. Maybe it's just not updated. So actually, let's just use this, and then we can build it together. We can build up that URL just so you also know, you have an idea of how it gets built up. So I'm going to declare a constant, and I'm going to call it URL string. Now keep in mind, this is not how we are going to do it in our real project. I'm just going to write out the whole string here, including the API key and all the parameters. So to include parameters, you put a question mark, and then from that point on, it's parameters. And then the format to specify parameters is going to be parameter name equals parameter value. Okay. So what is the first one we should specify? How about part? Since part is required anyways. So we're going to type part equals, and remember, you can specify one or more of these. And it tells you to specify more, you would put a comma in between them. But we only need snippet. So I'm just going to put snippet. Now to specify a second parameter, you put ampersand and then the same parameter name equals parameter value format. Okay. So what's the second parameter that we want to specify? That's playlist ID. You have to follow it based off the capitals as well. So lowercase p playlist followed by big I ID. Now equals, what is the playlist ID? I'm going to pull the screen up again, and I'm going to grab my ID from here. Oh, now this actually makes sense. If you can see the URL, you can see playlist, and then there's a question mark, right? Which means parameters from now on. List is the parameter name, equals, and then parameter value. And then the end of the parameter value is ampersand, and then second parameter, and so on and so forth. That's why I say grab everything after the equal sign, but before the ampersand, because that is just the connector for the next parameter. All right, so that's my playlist ID. So let's put it right there. I also need one more parameter. Let's put the ampersand sign, and this is key equals my API key. Now, I keep saying this because I don't want someone to watch this and say, hey, you shouldn't just put your API key there. I know, again, this is a test, so this is how we're going to do it right now. When we work on the real project, we will secure the key. So let's go back into our key here. I'm going to just show my key, and this is our test key. All right, we're going to put it right there. So that is the URL that we're going to send our request to. And this URL contains all of the request parameters, and the API key has everything we need. So here, let's create the URL instance. Let URL equals URL. And then we are going to use this one here where you can just pass in the URL string. But keep in mind that this creation of this URL instance, it may return, like it may not successfully be able to create this. So we have to check. If you are familiar at all with Swift, if you've taken some courses before, you'll know what optionals are. And creating this returns an optional URL instance, which means it may not be successful. So we have to we have to check for that first. So one way we can do that is we can say if let URL equals URL, right? And what this does is it checks if that is not nil, meaning that it was able to successfully create it, then assign it to this constant, and then we'll move that stuff in there, and then we can use it. But if it is nil, it's just going to skip and come down here, and it's not going to run any of this code. If it's nil, that means it wasn't able to successfully create the URL string, and we can't go on anyways. Okay, so now let's create the request. Let request equals URL request, and we're going to pass in this URL instance that we created, this one, right? So this is what we created. This checks that that isn't nil, and then if it's not nil, if it's not empty, it assigns it to this, and then we are passing that into the creation of our request. All right, now that we have our request in this constant, we are going to send the request with URL session. Okay, this is URL session is what we use for networking. So URL session shared, there's a shared session object that we can use. We don't have to create our own. And there is a method called data_for. Right? So this is going to fetch the data for a given request. Look, it all connects. We can pass in this request now into this method. But take a look. There are two keywords. There's async and there's throws. Those are two different things that we have to deal with and we have to observe. So let's talk about throws first. This keyword indicates that running this method, or executing this task, may potentially create an error. It's going to throw an error. That's where that word comes from. And you have to handle the error because you want to respond to it, right? If something bad happens, you want to take note of what happened. And then if it's something that you can recover from it. If it's something you cannot recover from, then maybe you display a message to the user and say, sorry, something bad happened, or like this happened, we cannot continue, please try again, type of thing. Or you can choose not to handle the error and just ignore it. That's perfectly reasonable for some errors. Okay, so that is what throws mean. And I'll show you in a second how we can handle that. Now, async is another keyword that indicates that this method is asynchronous. Now we have to take a little moment. If you haven't done any networking before, let me just quickly describe it to you with this scenario. Okay. So asynchronous is something like this. Let's say that you are waiting for a package at home. It's a very, very important package. They're not going to leave it at your door. Let's say it's a new MacBook. You bought a new MacBook. You're waiting for it to come. And so you're waiting at home. It's going to be sometime today, but you don't know exactly when it's going to get delivered. But you really need to go buy some milk, right? Or maybe buy lunch. Let's say you have to go buy lunch and you have no food at home. You're starving. So what do? You can leave and go buy lunch yourself, but there's a chance that that MacBook may get delivered and you're not home. You're going to miss it, and that would be bad. Well, what do? Well, it turns out you have someone at home. Could be a mom, could be a dad, could be a brother, could be a sister, could be your spouse. You ask them, hey, can you go pick up lunch? Because I need to stay home and wait for this MacBook. Right? So you send that person to go bring lunch, and that person goes and gets lunch while you can stay home and wait for the package. That is exactly what's happening here. So asynchronous means that just like you're sending someone to go pick up lunch, you are sending a background task or background helper. In computer terms, they call it a background thread. You're sending that to go perform this network operation. Go fetch that data from the YouTube API while I remain here responding to user interaction and just like keeping the lights running, just keeping everything operational. And when you get the response from the YouTube API, then come back to me and let me know what that data is and I'll deal with it. Now, why is this important? just like how you had to stay home and wait for that MacBook, if we get the main thread to go and fetch the data and send off the request and wait for the data to come back, then there will be no one to keep the lights running and things operational. It won't be, your app won't be able to respond to user interaction or do anything like that, okay? So that's why with these sorts of network tasks or some data tasks, you want to send a background thread to do, just like how you sent a helper to go pick up lunch. That's what asynchronous means. Okay, now that you know what these two keywords means, let's handle the throws one first, because there's a special syntax that you have to write in order to capture the error or potential error that can happen. Okay, so let's finish typing this out and then we're going to deal with these two keywords one at a time. Okay, so data for, and we're going to pass in request. Okay, so when something may potentially throw an error like this one, what we do is we have to put it inside a do catch block. So you do something, right? This is you do the thing that can throw the error in between these brackets right here. So that's what you're going to do. And then you're going to catch any potential errors right below it. And then you can print out any error that may happen. It's going to just put it in there. Now, one more thing you have to do just to indicate that something, that you understand that something can throw an error, is you put a try keyword in front of it, right? So you're going to do this, you're going to try this, and then you're going to catch any potential error and you're going to print it out. All right, so that handles the throws keyword for running this method. Now let's talk about the async keyword that we talked about. We want to send this task off in the background to grab the data and come back when it does. So what we have to do is put the await keyword. So what this does is it basically says before we execute any of the code below this line of code, it is going to wait for this to return. Why do we want to do that? Because let's say down here we are going to print out the response. Okay, actually here, so we're going to put handle error right here and print out response. We're going to put that right here. Right, we wouldn't want to print out the response before this comes back with the data, right? Because then there'd be nothing to print out. So by putting the await keyword in front of an asynchronous method, it is going to wait for this to happen in the background, finish doing its thing, come back, and then we are going to print out the response. Right? What are we going to print out? We have to assign the data that gets returned into something first, just like how we did here, like let URL equals that, let request equal that. So we're going to say let data, comma, response equals that. Now, why did I do this and what is this? This is called a tuple, and it's basically a collection of variables. So the reason I did this is because this, what gets returned is two things. One is the actual data, right? The JSON data, and the other is the response. They're two different things, and they will get assigned accordingly to this, to data and to response. So now when I print it out, I can print out the data and I can print out the response. And it's not going to run this code until this comes back because of this await statement right here. Okay, and now I can explain to you what this task keyword is. So the task keyword is for running asynchronous methods or asynchronous code, which is what this is, right? So it's just a special construct to be able to run code in the background. You can think of it like that. So now we're all set up. After writing all of that code, what we're going to do is run this project. It is going to execute this code as soon as the simulator launches. And then we're going to see some output, whether it caught an error or we actually see the data in the response. So let's take a look at what's happened here. If I open up this console area. And if you don't have this console area, it's actually just, it might be minimized. You just hit that button right there. And you might not have these tabs. So you just click these buttons in the lower right corner and open these tabs. Okay, so there are two things to notice here. This is the data, and we can't see the data. It's just telling us the size of the data. That's what happens when you try to print out data. But we're going to have to parse that JSON or convert that into usable data in our app. We're going to do that a few lessons later. But let's take a look at the response, because this can tell us a lot as well. Okay, so if you look for a status code 200, that's good. Remember back here in the API Explorer, oh, here it is. Okay, see, code 200. That means that this is a server code for successful. Server code 200. You can Google it. Server codes 200. Okay, it means okay. There are more codes. Let's take a look at what we get here. Now you can't actually see the JSON data, but you can see some details about the response. But status code 200, that is a good sign. That means that the API accepted our API key, it accepted our request as being valid, and it returned an okay response. Let's take a look at what happens if we just change some of the data. So let's say I mess up my API key. Where's the key? Right here. I'm just going to delete a couple of letters from it and run it again and see what the status code is this time. It's 400. That's bad. 400 is not good. Okay, so it probably detected that our API key is not valid, right? So bad request. Perfect. That's awesome. That's exactly what we expected. Let me undo. So the API key should be valid. Let me just mess up my playlist ID a little bit. See how that changes things. Okay, it's a 404. Well, what's a 404? Not found. It couldn't find my playlist because I messed up the playlist ID. Right, so this is really good. That means everything is working as we expect it to, but wouldn't it be great if you could actually see the response? Right here, we're just looking at status code of the response. Well, sometimes when you're programming and you're working with networking calls like we are doing now, it'd be super helpful to take a peek into what the actual contents of the response and the requests are. And that's where you use a third-party network debugging tool. So I'm going to show you how to use Proxyman, which you can use for free with your iOS app development. And then we can take a peek at the actual response and we can see the data. So let's go ahead and download and install Proxyman. Go ahead and visit proxyman.io and you can download the Mac app. Keep in mind you can use this for free, and there are paid features, so you can look into that, but I recommend just start for free for now. Okay, so I'm going to launch my Proxyman. Now yours might not look like this because there'll probably be onboarding for you. You probably have to walk through a few steps first, but one important thing for you to do is to go down to a certificate, and you're going to have to install a few things. So install certificate on this Mac first, and then install certificate on iOS, and you're going to choose simulators. But it helps if you actually have the simulator up and running. So in your Xcode project, just run your project so you have the simulator open, and take note of what it is, iPhone 15 Pro, because it's going to be installed on this simulator. So yeah, this is what you do. Choose simulators, and then it is going to, first of all, this was installing it on your Mac. If you haven't done that, you have to click this button, and then it should say found the simulator because you have it launched. So it's looking for it. It should say it's found, and then you are going to choose just prepare simulators, and then it's going to ask you to reboot it. So you click this button and it reboots the simulator with the new certificate. And this will allow Proxyman to stand in between the requests that your simulator makes and receives. And that's how you're going to be able to see the data, right? So what you're going to do, sometimes you have to restart Xcode. it's a little finicky. If you don't see what I'm showing you, then try restarting Xcode as well as the simulators. But if everything is set up correctly, then what you should be able to do is if you run the app now and you open up this apps tab, you should see it appear here. So there it is. That's my project, right? And let's see here. That's not this one. Okay, so what I can do is right click and pin, and it'll show up here. And you can see that it sent a request to this domain. It was okay, but I need to resend the request to see the content. Okay, so let me run this project again, and you'll see a second request being made, and this time you can see everything. Take a look at that. So this side on the left is request, this side on the right is response. So for the request, you can see, for the query, you can see all of the parameters you specified. So there's key, there's playlist ID, and there's part, and that was all from the URL. But the response is the interesting part, right? You can see the response code here. It's right here, 200. But if you take a look at the body right here, this is the data that was returned in the response. Remember when we ran it in the Xcode project? This data right here, we printed the data, right? And it just showed the data size. Well, with Proxyman, we can actually take a peek into what the data is. Here's all the data. And so this is a very helpful tool to use when you are working with network calls. Now, if you are having trouble seeing what I'm seeing, I would recommend that you go through the troubleshooting steps. Let's see here. When we chose this, there was some troubleshooting steps you could try, and launches some documentation for you to try things out. So this is what it looks like. Yeah. So just go through this and try these troubleshooting steps. Okay. Not the end of the world if you can't get this working, because as you can see, even without Proxyman, we're able to send the response, send the request and get the response and the status code 200 and all that. All right, so again, this was a test project. This is not the way we're going to do things like this. We definitely want to secure the key and do things a little more elegantly, not just everything in this content view. So we're going to create a separate component to handle the network stuff, and we'll do all that. All right, but this was a huge success going through this part, and I hope you learned a few things. All right, now that we know we can connect to the API and retrieve data from it, we're ready to start our actual Xcode project for the app. In the next lesson, we're going to start a new Xcode project. We're going to store the API key securely. We're going to start roughing out some of the screens as well as some of the components that we'll need for the app. If you're enjoying the build so far, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you were successfully able to connect to the YouTube API, please comment down below and say, I did it. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.